So this is going to be my little lecture on the Mexican Revolution and how it was a revolution for the masses. And we're going to cover three important topics that were critical for the Mexican Revolution. It's going to be on land reform, the political leaders, and the U.S. involvement into Mexico. And we're going to end this a little lecture on how the revolution came to a conclusion and the effects it might have had on Mexico. So, the main important thing about the Mexican Revolution is the issue of land reform and how farmers and working classes, indigenous, and just the lower classes strived for land reform because the majority of land was held up either by foreign investors or hacienda owners or caudillos. Another form to say that would be like landowners, just very large landowners, and they owned these large estates, and these lower classes, farmers and indigenous, would work these lands and would pretty much pay most of their pay would go back to the owners because they would also live on the land. And one of the main things we'll cover later with Porfirio Diaz, how his role was with land and how he opened up Mexico to foreign investors. But these are two plans. These are just two popular plans that were proposed by some political leaders. This one proposed by Plan de San Luis was proposed by Madero, while Plan de Ayala was proposed by Zapata. Just two different plans. Plan de Ayala was more popular with the lower classes because it focused on them and providing land back to them and the convenience for them, how they would easily show proof that this land belonged to them rather than a cabildo or a hacienda owner. While the Plan de San Luis was a little bit more of a moderate position, while it did have room to make it easy for peasants to show proof of their land, it was a little bit more difficult and mostly followed the same steps, but it would have to involve more paying back the landowners, while the Plan de Ayala did not have that little clause of providing payment back to the homeowners. But pretty much the other thing about land reform and the Mexican Revolution was it was definitely a class war because of these large landowners versus these peasants who had worked this land for generations and generations. Now, the next topic we're going to move on is the U.S. involvement into the Mexican Revolution. And the U.S. involvement into Mexico had to do with foreign investments and political influence over some of the leaders. Right here, like you can see, there's a wanted poster for Pancho Villa. Pancho Villa was known for crossing the Rio Grande and attacking Texas cities and coming back into Mexico, running away. And at one point, they sent General Pershing Square across to fight and find him and hunt him down and such like that. The other important thing about U.S. involvement into Mexico was its foreign investment into the country, how it invested heavily in its railroad, in its coal and oil industries. So a lot of U.S. companies, like Standard Oil, owned a lot of production in Mexico and while they invested a lot into the country, a lot of money did not stick around in the country. It would go back into the U.S. and into the pockets of U.S. citizens rather than the people of Mexico. And these are some of the political leaders who were involved in the Mexican Revolution. This man here is Emiliano Zapata. This man here is Pancho Villa. And this man here is Porfirio Diaz, who was a long-term dictator and leader of Mexico for up to like 10 years. And, he's kind of a middle love-hate thing with Mexico because the large reforms that he provided for the country, and he brought Mexico kind of into a higher industrialization level, but at the same time he opened up the country into foreign investments, which did not give back into the people. So this is where these two men step in, where they kind of represented this ideology, fighting for the people and for the masses and for the peasants, and providing back to them because their government did not provide enough for them. These are some of the political leaders who were involved kind of on the other side, but at the same time worked with Pancho Villa and Zapata. Like this man is Francisco Madero, this man here is Victorian Huerta, this man here is Venustiano Carranza. These men here kind of were revolutionary leaders and political politicians. They were voted into office as well, all of them, and all of them were also either threw one another out of office through coups and such like that. These men kind of were more conservative, but at the same time tried to be moderate for the people and stuff like that. But they still mostly passed legislation that supported investors and higher classes rather than low classes, working class. And then we come to the end of the Mexican Revolution, somewhere in the mid-1930s, with the election of Lázaro Cárdenas and the formation of the PRI party, Partido Revolucionario Institucional, which just meant the institutionalized political revolutionary party. And this party kind of ended up dominating Mexico for the next 70 years. And one of the major things that Lázaro Cárdenas was known for was nationalizing the oil companies. So they did have to pay back some of the U.S. investors and such like that. But ultimately, oil came back to the people, and investments were coming back into the country rather than leaving the country. So this has been my little lecture on the Mexican Revolution. Thank you.